Good morning and welcome to Sunday Civics, the home for the civically engaged. I am your host, your civics teacher and neighborhood political strategist, L. Joy Williams. And welcome back to the next iteration, the next conversation of the Porch Light Series, where we leave the light on for democracy, for justice, and for each other. Now, last week, I asked you to imagine what if. What if democracy wasn't just the ballot box, but a very, very real lived reality of justice? And so this week, I want us to sit with a question that's both personal and political. What grounds you? The time that we're living in right now, when faith is being twisted into a weapon, when democracy is under attack, and when our people are fighting just to survive, grounding is not optional, it's necessary. One of the freedom fighters that I hold close and whose words empower me, and I'm actually going to share a number of them with you this morning, but one of them is South African freedom fighter Steve Biko. And he once said that the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And that is definitely a word. Because oppression doesn't only live in Supreme Court decisions. It lives in what we believe about ourselves. If we start believing and operating on that belief that we are less than, that we are minority, right? When Karen talks about the global majority, that is giving you language to remove what has been implanted in our brains and in our spirit. If we start praying to a God who looks nothing like you, who does not come from you, who does not place your well-being, your heart, your spirit, your soul at the center, that system doesn't even, they don't even have to put us in bondage. They don't even have to put you in jail. They don't even have to keep you locked in under-resourced communities because we do it to ourselves. Biko also saw how Christianity itself had been distorted to serve apartheid. He wrote in its interpretation of the Bible, the white church has tended to look at it through the lens and through the eyes of the privileged. They see Christ as the divinely appointed custodian of the status quo. It is this interpretation that has made Christianity the ideal religion for the maintenance of a subservient people. Now, I got to read that again, all right? This is from Steve Biko. He's writing about South African apartheid, grew up in a Christian religion, and is grappling with the Jesus and the religion and the faith that he was brought up in, the tradition he was brought up in, that he was very committed to, but also committed to freedom. And this is what he wrote. In its interpretation of the Bible, the white church has tended to look at it through the eyes of the privileged. They see Christ as the divinely appointed custodian of the status quo. It is this interpretation that has made Christianity the ideal religion for the maintenance of a subservient people. Now, if you can make Jesus into the custodian of the status quo, then you can make people believe that suffering is holy, that silence is obedience, that oppression is part of God's plan. That's why the liberation theologian, that's how you say it, Gustavo Gutierrez, he insisted the gospel is not merely a message of otherworldly salvation, but a call to transform unjust social structures here and now. To know God is to do justice. Notice the action. Right? It is not just to believe it, is not wish to pray for it, is not just enough to believe in it, but to actually commit it, to act. That's grounding. refusing to let faith be reduced to the afterlife, insisting that faith must be lived in this life, in the structures we build, in the justice we demand. Because after all, that is Christ-like. And I'll tell you, that is where my grounding comes from. It started with my grandmother, with my aunts, my cousins, my pastor, who was my great uncle, who preached about Jesus as a liberator. Not the meek, blonde-haired figure in a stained glass window who was stuck in that place, stuck in that window, but a Jesus who overturned tables, who stood with the poor, who confronted empire, who confronted the status quo and the people who, even from his own people, the people who stood in the way, stood in the gap to maintain it. So when I grew up and met folks whose Jesus not only looked different, but also was colonized, domesticated, and stripped of the power and majesty, I was like, who is that? Because that's not the Jesus I knew, right? The Aubrey Hendricks, I'm mispronouncing everybody's names. Y'all gonna have to forgive me. But he reminds us in the politics of Jesus that Jesus did not come to make believers, but to make disciples, disciplined, dedicated followers committed to a life of justice, compassion, and resistance to oppression. That's grounding. It's not a private belief, but a public commitment. And one of our mothers, the mother of womanist theology, Katie Cannon, said, our task is doing the work our souls must have. Grounding is about that soul work, living in integrity, refusing to separate what we believe from how we act. If our souls demand justice, then our actions must line up with that justice. Now, I'm sharing this in the context of Christianity because that is my personal faith tradition. That's how I was raised. That's the language I use. That's all I know in terms of a faith grounding, because that is what I was raised in. And that grounding carries me. It's not only connected, very, very tightly woven into my faith and to God, but also in family, like faith, God, family. It's all woven together. And I understand that that could have been a very different reality if my ancestors would have stayed on another continent, right? But that's my frame. My faith is Christianity. That is what it is framed around. And so that is the language and the grounding that I use. But I don't believe it is the sole way to experience faith and grounding. It might be for you the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. For others, it might be rooted in traditional African religions, or it may be a completely different spiritual practice altogether. Grounding is personal. It is the anchor you choose, the foundation that steadies you. And if you've listened to the show for some time, you've heard me say this before. My faith is how I govern myself. It is not what I impose upon you. Your actions, the way you love people, the way you resist injustice, the way you build community, that should tell the story of the God you serve, the gods you serve, the faith you practice. So when I talk about Jesus, I'm talking about my grounding. I am not saying that that is the only path and the path that you must follow. When I ask you what grounds you, I'm asking you to name the source of your own courage, your own compassion, your own clarity. Howard Thurman asked the question, right, that Dr. King carried with him everywhere. I think he carried it in his little briefcase, or I don't know why I got to put little on everything. My husband said I need to stop doing that. But what does the religion of Jesus have to say to those whose backs are against the wall? That question is the heartbeat of liberation faith. If our faith doesn't speak to the disinherited, the dispossessed, the disenfranchised, then what good is it? And Jacqueline Grant, another very powerful womanist theologian, put it even more directly. The Black women's Jesus is not the passive sufferer of white women's theology. but the liberator who empowers survival, resistance, and community. Right? Sit with that. Jesus is not the passive sufferer who suffered under the weight of the status quo, under the weight of empire, but the liberator who empowers survival, resistance, and community. Because so many of our foremothers survived not by bowing their heads, but by walking with a Jesus who lifted them up, who affirmed their dignity, who empowered their resistance. That song, that freedom song, that protest music that came from their bellies and came out through a powerful voice was powered by this belief in a liberator, not a passive sufferer. And James Cone said it plain in the Black Theology of Liberation: any message that is not related to the liberation of the poor in a society is not Christ's message. Theology must be accountable to the oppressed community, or it is simply a theology of the oppressor. A faith that doesn't liberate is not faith. It is just a tool of empire. So here we are in this country with more Black faces in high places than ever before, and yet a lot of the systems remain the same. Kids on one side of the town don't have the same opportunities, the same resources as kids on the other, sometimes not even less than a mile from each other. Housing's either still segregated or elusive. Wealth still concentrated. Police still operate with impunity. Right? Representation without grounding is fragile. It was our hope. It was our prayer, it was our desire that the people that we were sending to represent us, they would be from us. They would have the same or similar grounding, that they would look out for us. But we also have to make sure that our leaders are grounded. Because if they're not grounded, the table doesn't change. And if we, the people, aren't grounded, we also lose our way and not put the people in place, not participate in the systems that allow us to have full representation to seek justice for the disinherited, the dispossessed, and the disenfranchised. So I don't say all of this just to semi-preach this morning. I say all of this because even, and this is very timely for the period that we find ourselves in this week, to evaluate the faith one professes based upon the way that they act. And I say that also for us. Can we go into a house of worship and sing a liberation song, sing a song of faith, sing and remind ourselves about the power of a liberating God, and not act upon, not use the gifts that we were empowered with to do that job? To not wait until an afterlife, not wait until we are again stardust to seek freedom, but to put into practice. Because if you're in the same faith tradition, these things and more shall we do. That more could be freedom and liberation and housing and food and education, a different way of life. We have had a long time of injustice while still having the tools to be able to uplift humanity. That's my grounding. All right. And that brings me to today's conversation. All right. And again, I asked you the question on what grounds you. And the question of, even for the leaders and for the people that we have in place who are in those rooms to make those decisions, the question is what grounds them once they get there. Now I have a guest to bring to the front of our civics class out here on the porch, Dr. Cassandra Gould, who has carried a prophetic mantle of faith and justice. She's pastored not only in the church, but in, as she says, the public square. She insists that faith must be lived, not just believed. And she reminds us that leaving the porch light on is about more than waiting for folks to come home. It's about creating spaces of safety, belonging, and grounding. So as you listen, I want you to hold this question in your spirit. What grounds you? Because that sets the tone for how you will act in your civic life, what you will demand, what you will fight for. We're going to take a break here. And when we come back, we'll be joined by Dr. Professor Gould, and we will continue this conversation. So we'll be right back.